Good morning. Thanks for staying with us on Money FM 89.3. It's Lynlee and Adrian Abraham, and this is why it matters. Adrian, you know what a catfish is?
Yes, of course I do. And they're very interesting looking creatures as well. We've come across them multiple times. Looking forward to what else we can find out about them today.
Well, you might not have seen this particular species of catfish, but there is a bottle here, right here in our studio this morning. And I don't know whether you can see this, but yeah, here's the catfish. If you're looking at our video, the catfish looks like, I don't know, how can you describe this, Adrian?
It's a lot smaller than I thought it would be. Maybe it's a different type, a different species.
Okay. Anyway, just recently, local scientists have discovered the presence of this species in Singapore's only remaining freshwater swamp.
Yes, we're talking about the well-protected Nissan swamp forest. And apparently, all this while, it's been eluding scientists who have been conducting extensive surveys there for 30 years.
And aside from this catfish species, many other species too have been found in Singapore for the first time over the years. And to share the significance of that all, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Tan Heok Hui, Curator of Fishes, and Associate Professor Darren Yeo, head of the Chian Natural History Museum. And they're both from the Faculty of Science at the National University of Singapore. Well, very warm welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Good morning, both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, now, Dr. Tan, let's start with you. Zooming into this catfish species, what first piqued your curiosity on whether it's possibly a species that's not in our records?
When students first sent me the pictures of this fish, I actually thought it was a joke, a practical joke. And I didn't believe it at first, and I had to verify that it was obtained from Singapore. Yeah, and the students didn't quite recognize it because they hadn't surveyed out of Singapore before. And this fish is so uncommon that personally, in over 30 years, I've only encountered it less than 6 times. So the telltale sign is, despite it being a walking catfish family, the Claridae, it's got an extra fin on the dorsal side.
Okay.
Yeah, so that distinguishes it from the rest of the walking catfish.
Okay. What else can you tell us about this species?
It's usually very secretive. It's not normally seen swimming around in open waters, and it's usually associated with highly acidic waters of peat swamps. And peat swamps, the pH can go down as low as 3. So you can imagine the neutral pH is pH 7. So this is rather acidic. And these fishes have adapted to survive in such conditions. And Singapore does not have peat swamps. Peat swamps are usually characterized by color of water, which is on reflected surface looks black, like kopi o. Yeah.
Okay.
It almost takes me back to biology class when I was at school looking at all these containers. Dr. Tan, could you explain what the process is like when it comes to identifying species, and why should people really care about it?
The comparison, to identify the species, we basically had to go through all previous records, look at the published papers, examine the specimens under the microscope, did the counts of the fin rays, and etc. And it was, not an easy task, because this fish is only known from less than a dozen preserved specimens. But the good thing is, the Zoological Reference Collection at the Chian Natural History Museum has a very decent freshwater fish collection, specifically from Southeast Asia. So that helps a lot, and that really quickened the process, and we managed to narrow it down to that particular species in a relatively short time, like within a week.
Must have been very exciting.
It was, yes. Initially I was just totally taken aback. And wow,
Are you sure?
yeah, the last comprehensive listing of freshwater fish in Singapore was published in 1966. And from then to now, there's no record of such fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to Prof. Yeo, bringing you into the conversation. We understand that these species had remained undetected through the years, despite extensive efforts into monitoring and documenting new species of freshwater fish in this area. From a wider perspective, what are the challenges when it comes to picking up new records like this?
So new records, I guess it depends primarily on the ability to go in and survey as much as possible. So we don't often do surveys continuously, monitoring continuously and all that. That's because obviously there will always be manpower issues, timing issues, resource issues. The other challenge will be for species such as this, like this particular catfish. You need someone with a keen eye to be able to at least detect that there is something different, something off about this species, right? So we were very lucky because the students who were there doing a project for something else happened to come across this, and they sort of felt that it was a bit different. So if you're not familiar or you don't have a sense for this, it might look like some of the other fishes that are already well known and all that, and you might just pass it off as common species. So we're lucky in that way.
Okay, Nissan swamp forest, that's where this catfish species was discovered.
Yep.
It's actually the last significant fragment of freshwater swamp forest in Singapore. Maybe clue us in a little bit more on the importance of this fragment and the role such freshwater species play in our wider ecosystem?
So Singapore used to have more extensive freshwater swamp forests. So this particular habitat is a little bit different from the other streams you see if you walk into the nature reserve, say around Bukit Timah or MacRitchie. You'll see some forest streams, but freshwater swamp is slightly more acidic. The substrate is different, more spongy. Basically, it's a swamp. And what you have is a different assemblage of species there, unique to it, like a bit like this fish. So there are some fishes, there are quite a number of fishes and other species that are found only in Nissan swamp forests and nowhere else in Singapore. So, in the past when we had other swamp forests, probably you find similar ones there, but this is the only one remaining. And so whatever species we have in swamp forests in Singapore can only be found in Nissan, nowhere else.
Oh, I see.
Dr. Tan, going back to you,
Yes.
what does this latest discovery tell you about our freshwater species and how they're faring, and especially against a backdrop of biodiversity loss that's resulting from climate change?
So basically, it tells us that there's still stuff that we don't know out there, and it opens up it really opens up your mind to consider all avenues, and it just shows that we need to be vigilant, and as well as to do more organized monitoring programs, and also to train up the next generation to be able to recognize such fish.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to discover.
Yeah, in a sense, yes. And then we should also treasure what's left and try to conserve it, and maybe try to rehabilitate.
Okay. Prof, it's a common misconception that Singapore is an urban jungle devoid of nature. In fact, we understand that hundreds of new species have been discovered here over the past decade. But should we be concerned whether the presence of these species could upset the balance within our natural ecosystem? And will nature do its job here without human intervention on the flip side?
Well, it depends on what you refer to as new species, right? So if they're like this and they're new native species that are discovered, that means things that have eluded discovery, they've always been here, they can be left alone, they will do their job. So every species has a job, a role to play in an ecosystem. But you also have a number of species that are introduced. So the introduced species are the ones that we want to keep an eye on when they introduced by man, right? So these are the ones we want to keep an eye on when we discover them. In some instances, they are not really causing a problem because they are in habitats where there are less native species or no native species around. But in other cases, they could easily get into the forests and start interacting with our native species and potentially cause problems for our native species. So that's one of the things to keep an eye on when it comes to all these new discoveries.
Interesting.
Dr. Tan, bringing you back into the conversation. Of course, it is exciting, when there are such discoveries. But is it possible to tell if these species, like in the case of the catfish, whether they are thriving well here? And if not, are there steps taken to try and help them survive?
Well, one of the steps that we do have is constant monitoring, and we are involved with the NBUX team to do that. And an indication that they are doing well is the presence of both juveniles and adults. So that is a good indication that it's rejuvenating. And as well that we are finding out that they're not only found in one stream, but in several. Yeah. So that does give positive feedback that it's thriving. And of course, with continued monitoring, we will closely, observe them and
Yeah,
make sure they do well.
And moving on to Professor Yeo, aside from Nissoon Swamp Forest, right? We're curious, of course we are. Which other parts of Singapore are your researchers monitoring right now? And are there any promising areas that you can tell us about?
Well, right now, inland, some of our researchers are involved in a national parks survey of the Central Catchment Nature Reserve and its surroundings. So that's a survey organized by NParks with various other scientists, academics, citizen scientists involved. Our researchers are also involved in various surveys of the marine areas. Again, often with National Parks Board collaborators, but as well, we also work with Tropical Marine Science Institute in NUS and various other folks. So the surrounding areas, especially the marine areas, I think these are the main areas we're focusing on. Yeah, I think that's basically it, because these are the areas where you will find the most diversity.
Okay, these newly discovered species, how do we protect them? Should there be new regulations around protecting these species that are making their presence felt here for the very first time?
Well, so for this particular catfish species, right, it's already found within Nissoon Swamp Forest, which is a nature reserve, which is part of the Central Catchment Nature Reserve. So it's already got that legislative protection. But we can always do better by monitoring again, as Heok Hui just said, monitoring the populations and all that, but also looking out for how people interact with the nature reserve and all that, and just treat the nature reserve properly when they go in and all that, not to mess up the place and pollute or go off trail and things like that, because these things can affect the habitat. It's still quite sensitive.
Just out of curiosity, Dr. Tan, how many species of catfish are there
in Singapore?
Yep.
Ooh, I never really counted that. Freshwater wise, we've got perhaps around 10, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, out of which roughly half are only found in Nissoon. I mean, Central Catchment.
Okay, so we might be finding more species from there.
Given the size of the area, I mean, already with this new record, it's very surprising. I mean, personally, I mean, it's quite an astounding fact that it's found in Singapore. It goes to show that our swamp forest is actually very mature to be able to support this kind of fish, which is only found in acid waters. It means it has persisted for way before Stanford Raffles found Singapore.
Wow. Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming into our studio. We've been speaking with Dr. Tan Heok Hui, Curator of Fishes, and Associate Professor Prof. Darren Yeo, Head of the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Money FM 89.3